Boston, January 1933. High above the frozen harbor, the directors of the most powerful company in the Western Hemisphere are seated around a long mahogany table, watching an old man lose his temper. He's 55, built like a dock worker because he used to be one. His suit is expensive, and he wears it like it isn't. And he is angry because these men are burning his life down. Their company, United Fruit, owns more of Central America than most of the governments there. Its stock has fallen 90% in 3 years. Every dollar this man has is buried in it. So he stands in front of the board and tells them what they're doing wrong. And he would know. He's forgotten more about this business than anyone in the room will ever learn. But that's not what they hear. What they hear is his accent. Russian, thick, the sound of steerage, of the docks, of everything these men were born above. One of the directors waits for him to finish, adjusts his glasses, says, with a small smile, words to this effect. "Unfortunately, I can't understand a word you say." The room chuckles. The old man goes quiet, picks up his papers, walks out. What he does next becomes one of the great revenge stories in the history of American money. But to understand it, you have to go back 40 years to a train platform in Alabama and a pile of bananas nobody wanted. His name wasn't Sam Zemurray yet. It was Sam Zemurray, born in 1877 on a wheat farm near Kishinev in the Russian Empire, a place where being Jewish meant your future had a ceiling, and the ceiling was low. His father died young. The farm couldn't hold everyone. So in 1892, at 14, he crossed the Atlantic with his aunt and landed, of all places, in Selma, Alabama, where relatives ran a small store. He did whatever paid, swept floors, delivered groceries, peddled goods door to door in the Alabama heat. He was tall, quiet, and watched everything. Somewhere in those first years, he saw his first banana. Hard to imagine now, but in 1890s America, a banana was exotic. A tropical luxury that arrived by steamship from a jungle most Americans couldn't find on a map. It also had a fatal flaw. A banana is a clock. From the moment it's cut, it's dying. Green to yellow to spotted to garbage in days. That flaw is the entire story of what happened next. At 18, Sam went to the docks at Mobile, where the fruit boats unloaded. The big importers sorted every cargo, and anything already flecked with brown, anything that wouldn't survive the slow rail trip inland, they threw away. Whole mountains of fruit, perfectly good, written off as trash. The pier men called them ripes. Sam looked at the garbage pile and saw a loophole. The fruit wasn't bad. It was just in a hurry. He spent his savings, about $150, on a load of ripes, rented space in a boxcar, and rode north with the fruit. And this is the move that tells you who he was. At every stop, while the train took on water, he ran to the telegraph office and wired the grocers in the next town. Cheap bananas. Meet the train. They'd be standing on the platform, cash ready, when he rolled in. He wasn't selling fruit. He was racing a clock, and he'd figured out how to sell while moving. He slept in the boxcars next to the bananas, ate next to them, did again, and again. The nickel and dime runs became routes. The routes became a company. By 21, so the story goes, the kid from Kishinev had $100,000 in the bank. Over $3 million in today's money, built entirely on garbage nobody else would touch. The trash he was buying, by the way, came off the ships of one company in particular, United Fruit. The Boston Giant. The Octopus, people in Latin America called it, because its arms were everywhere. Railroads, ports, politicians. To United Fruit, Sam Zemurray wasn't a competitor. He was a seagull following their boats, living off scraps. They happily sold him their leavings and went back to lunch. Keep that image in mind. It ages well, because Sam was done with scraps. If you sold bananas, the real money was in growing them, owning the land, the trees, the clock itself. And the land was south, in Honduras, on a muddy river called the Guatemala. He bet everything on it, mortgaged himself to every bank in New Orleans that would take his signature, which was precisely when Washington, D.C., without knowing he existed, decided to wipe him out. The problem with betting everything on Honduras. Honduras wasn't entirely for sale to you. The country was broke, dragging a mountain of foreign debt it had carried since the railroad schemes of the century before. And in Washington, Secretary of State Philander Knox had a tidy solution. J.P. Morgan's bank would refinance Honduras's debt, and in exchange, Morgan's men would take over the Honduran customs houses, physically sit in the ports, collect the taxes, until the loans were repaid. Bankers running the borders of a sovereign country. Respectable people called it diplomacy. For Sam, it was a death sentence. His entire operation ran on sweetheart concessions from the Honduran government. Equipment imported duty-free, taxes near zero. Under the Morgan arrangement, every one of those deals would be torn up and repriced. He had mortgaged everything for land that was about to become worthless. One man in New Orleans, drowning in debt over bananas, versus the United States State Department and the most powerful bank on earth. He went to Washington to argue. The message he got back, in substance, this is policy. Stay out of Honduran affairs. Most men would have stayed out. Sam went home to New Orleans and found Manuel Bonilla, the former president of Honduras, thrown out in a previous shuffle, living in exile, broke, and dreaming of a comeback. A comeback needed guns, a boat, and money. Sam had money. For the guns, there was Lee Christmas, a Louisiana railroad engineer who drifted south, reinvented himself as a soldier of fortune, and become the most famous mercenary in Central America. Beside him, a New Orleans gunman with the world's least subtle nickname, Guy Machine Gun Milani. One problem: Washington suspected something exactly like this. Secret Service agents were in New Orleans, openly shadowing Bonilla, watching the docks, watching Sam. So, the story goes, the plotters threw a party. A loud, well-lit night at one of the French Quarter's better bordellos. Drinks flowing, the agents outside, settling in for a long evening. While the party roared, Bonilla and Christmas slipped out the back, down to the water, where a launch carried them to a yacht Sam had bought for the occasion. The Hornet, a former United States Navy vessel, now loaded with rifles, ammunition, and cash. By the time the Secret Service figured it out, the Hornet was in open water, sailing south. In January 1911, Christmas and his men took the port town of La Ceiba. Machine guns against a government garrison. The Honduran government, already wobbling, collapsed into ceasefire. President Davila, the man ready to sign Morgan's deal, was finished. The deal died with him. And in February 1912, Manuel Bonilla was inaugurated president of Honduras, bought in significant part with banana money. Bonilla didn't forget his creditor. Within months, Sam's company received 24,700 acres of prime land on the north coast, plus tax exemptions and duty-free imports locked in for years. The concessions Washington tried to erase came back bigger than before. Bonilla died in office 13 months later, but the paperwork outlived him. Paperwork usually does. Add it up. A private American citizen was facing ruin by government policy. So he hired mercenaries, outran the Secret Service, and overthrew the government. And it worked. No trial, no scandal that stuck. His business simply grew. Somewhere in New Orleans, an immigrant not yet 35 had learned the most dangerous lesson of his life. Countries have a price, and it's lower than you think. And up in Boston, the Octopus finally stopped selling scraps to the Seagull and took a long, careful look at what he'd become. To understand the war that came next, you have to understand how differently the two sides saw a banana. To United Fruit, a banana was a number. The company was run from an office tower in Boston by men in starch collars. Bankers' sons, Harvard men, directors who had in many cases never set foot on a plantation. Their empire was magnificent on paper. Millions of acres, a private navy of white-hulled steamships, railroads, ports, telegraph lines. The largest employer in Central America, managed like a railroad timetable. From a distance, to Sam, a banana was a plant, a living thing with moods. He moved to the jungle, learned Spanish. The men called him El Amigo. He rode mules through his own plantations, walked the rows with a machete, ate in the camps, slept where his workers slept. When an agronomist had an idea, Sam heard it in person, in the field, standing in the mud the idea was about. If it made sense, they tried it that season. No committee, no Boston. The ideas came. Guatemala irrigated from overhead, mimicking rain instead of flooding trenches. They pruned selectively, staked the plants, drained and graded land the textbooks called unusable. The result was fruit that was simply better, bigger, more consistent, and buyers on the Gulf Coast paid a premium for it. The seagull now had plantations across the water from the Octopus. Year by year, the giants started losing. Not everywhere, but in enough places to feel it. Losing to a man their own executives dismissed as a peddler with mud on his boots. In the trade, they told a joke with teeth in it. United Fruit had 1,000 vice presidents, and Guatemala had Sam. Then the rivalry stopped being funny. Both companies held land along the Motagua River, on the disputed border between Honduras and Guatemala. Guatemala on one side, United Fruit on the other, each backed by the government whose territory it enriched. Where the border actually ran depended on which country you asked. So the companies pushed. Land crews with armed escorts. Bridges built into contested ground. Each escalation answered by another. By 1928, the situation had curdled into something absurd and dangerous. Two American fruit companies steering two sovereign nations toward the edge of shooting war. Over riverbank, troops moved, diplomats scrambled, and Washington, watching two of its corporate citizens play chicken with an actual war, leaned on both sides hard. In this, United Fruit did the math. Fighting Sam in the field wasn't working. The man was better at bananas than they were. So they reached for the weapon Boston trusted most. The checkbook. The offer arrived in the fall of 1929, weeks after a stock market crash that most people still thought was a correction. United Fruit would buy Guatemala outright and pay Sam not in cash, but in stock. 300,000 shares, roughly $31.5 million. He would become the single largest shareholder of the company he'd spent 20 years fighting on the condition that he retire. Walk away. Go be rich somewhere. Sam Zemurray was 52 years old. He'd been working since he was 14. He took the deal and tied his entire fortune to a stock certificate in the first winter of the Great Depression. For a moment, it looked like the perfect exit. The immigrant kid sells to the giant for $31 million and retires at 52 to a mansion on St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans. The American dream notarized. Then the Depression came for everybody. And it came for United Fruit with a special appetite. The thing about taking your fortune in stock instead of cash, your money is only as smart as the men running the company. And the men running United Fruit were about to give a masterclass in the opposite. As the economy fell, they did everything slowly and everything from Boston. Costs stayed fat while revenue starved. Decisions crawled through committees of vice presidents who'd never smelled a plantation. The company that owned half of Central America was being managed like a museum. The stock told the story. From over $100 a share to 50 to 20 to 10. Sam's 31 million melted to roughly 90 cents of every dollar he'd earned in 40 years of work. The boxcars, the jungle, the coup, all of it. Gone. Not because bananas stopped selling. Because of management. The cruelest part. He could see exactly what they were doing wrong. From New Orleans, he wrote to the board. Made suggestions. Asked questions. He was their largest shareholder, and he understood the business better than any man alive. They ignored him. Politely. Completely. To Boston, he wasn't the founder of their fiercest rival. He was an uncomfortable reminder. A loud Russian with mud money and no table manners, contractually retired. The agreement he'd signed meant they never had to hear from him again. He was 55. Wealthy men his age accepted these things, managed their decline, took up golf. Sam took the train instead. Not to Boston. Not yet. To the other shareholders. The families, the estates, the institutions who'd watched their United Fruit holdings rot alongside his. He didn't ask them to sell. He asked for something better, their proxies, the legal right to vote their shares. One meeting at a time, one signature at a time, until the satchel he carried held voting power the board knew nothing about. Then he booked the train to Boston. You already know what happened when he got there. The mahogany table, the speech, the director adjusting his glasses. I can't understand a word you say. The chuckle around the room. They were laughing in accent. They should have been counting the votes. So now you're back in the room. Boston, January 1933. The chuckle still hanging in the air. Understand what that sentence actually was. It wasn't about acoustics. It was a verdict. The Boston establishment telling the steerage passenger that no amount of money would ever make him one of them. They'd taken his company, taken his fortune down with theirs, and now they wouldn't even take his advice. Sam went quiet, gathered his papers, walked out. He came back with the satchel. In front of that same board, he opened it and laid the proxies on the mahogany. Signature after signature after signature. The voting rights of shareholders the board had assumed were safely asleep. The men in that room watched the arithmetic of their own destruction pile up on the table. However the vote went now, it went through Sam. What he said next has been quoted for over 90 years. The genuine version was blunter than I can say on this platform. The polite rendering goes, "You gentlemen have been messing up this business long enough. I'm going to straighten it out. No lawsuit, no hostile tender offer, no years of maneuvering. One meeting, the man they wouldn't listen to walked in as an embarrassment and walked out running United Fruit. Wall Street had a phrase for it within days. The fish had swallowed the whale, and the market cast its own vote. The stock jumped on the news. Even the money agreed. The peddler was worth more than the pedigree. What happened next is the part every business school skips, because it's almost embarrassingly simple. Sam didn't bring a secret formula. He brought the boxcars and the mud. Within weeks, he was in the tropics, walking plantations, doing what Boston never did. Looking. He gutted the committee system, slashed the tower of vice presidents, found the field managers, the men who knew which rivers flooded and which foremen stole, and handed them authority to act without cabling Boston for permission. His whole philosophy fit in one sentence he actually lived by. The man on the spot knows more than the man in the office. The company came back to life. Through the worst economy in American history, United Fruit returned to profit, and the shareholders who'd signed Sam's proxies were vindicated in the only language Boston respected. It's a perfect story, isn't it? The immigrant they laughed at, running the empire that once sold them its garbage. If this were a movie, the credits would roll right here. But it's not a movie, because the thing Sam Zemurray now controlled wasn't just a fruit company. It was the Octopus. Let's be precise about what Sam Zemurray was now in charge of. United Fruit didn't just operate in Central America. In several countries, it functionally was the state. It owned the railroads, the telegraph, the deep water ports. Its white ships were the national merchant fleet. Its company towns were the map. Workers lived in company housing, were treated in company hospitals, and in plenty of times and places were paid partly in scrip, money that only spent at the company store. Whole national economies balanced on one crop priced in Boston. Latin America had a name for the company long before Sam ran it. El Pulpo, the Octopus, and it had a history. In 1928, in Cienega, Colombia, 5 years before Sam took over, soldiers opened fire on striking United Fruit workers in a town square. The dead were counted in the dozens by the government and the thousands by everyone else. The true number is still argued today. That was the company Sam fought for 20 years. Then it bought the whale, cleaned up its books, and kept its methods. In Guatemala, the dictator Jorge Ubico handed United Fruit some of the sweetest terms in the hemisphere. Enormous land grants, near total tax exemption, the country's only real Atlantic port under company control. Politicians who cooperated did well. Men in the trade had a joke that traveled the region. That down there, a mule cost more than a congressman. Nobody laughed harder than the people who'd done the buying. Was Sam better than the Boston men? By most accounts, yes. He paid above the local rate, built schools and hospitals, and the workers who called him El Amigo meant it. But better at the top of the same machine. The machine's terms never changed. Our land, our port, your country. And this is where the man gets hard to hold in one frame. Because at the same time, Sam Zemurray was becoming one of the great philanthropists of the American South. Millions to Tulane. Children's clinics in New Orleans. One of the first endowed professorships for a woman at Harvard's Radcliffe. When the Second World War came, it took his own son, Sam Jr., killed flying in 1943. And in the years after, the old man used everything he had for a cause that made him proud. Leaning on a lifetime of Latin American connections to help move Jewish refugees by ship and to help swing the UN votes that created the State of Israel in 1947. The same man, the same telephone, the same voice that could liberate a refugee ship could price a congressman. Around this time, he made a hire that history would remember, a slight, brilliant New Yorker named Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, father of modern public relations, the man who could sell anything to anyone. Sam bought him for the company the way you'd buy insurance. Then, in 1944, Guatemala overthrew its dictator and tried something dangerous: democracy. The Guatemala that emerged from a 1944 revolution held real elections, wrote a modern constitution, and in 1951 inaugurated a president named Jacobo Arbenz, a young army colonel, earnest, reform-minded, and painfully aware of one number. 2% of Guatemalans own nearly 3/4 of the land. The biggest landowner of all was United Fruit. And the detail that stung most, the company wasn't even using it. Of the vast territory the Octopus held in Guatemala, only around 15% was planted. The rest sat idle. Held, the company said, in reserve against plant disease. Held, Guatemalans said, so no one else could have it. In June 1952, Arbenz signed Decree 900. On paper, it was almost boring. Uncultivated land on giant estates would be redistributed to landless farmers, and the owners compensated with government bonds. Compensation would be based on the land's declared tax value. Read that again. The value the owners themselves had declared. For taxes. For decades, United Fruit had told the Guatemalan tax office its land was worth almost nothing. Now the government said, fine, we'll pay you exactly what you swore it was worth. When the expropriation papers came for a couple 100,000 idle acres, the compensation offer ran to roughly $600,000. The company announced the land was actually worth close to $16 million. They'd been caught in their own paperwork. In a courtroom, that's an embarrassing afternoon. United Fruit didn't go to a courtroom. It went to Edward Bernays. And Bernays did what he'd been retained to do. He moved the fight from Guatemala to the American imagination. Junkets flew hand-picked journalists to the tropics. Stories bloomed across respected papers and magazines. Every story carried the same frame. Not fruit company disputes land valuation, but communism on America's doorstep. Was Arbenz a Soviet agent? A red beachhead 2-day sail from New Orleans? In the fevered logic of the early Cold War, asking the question was the conviction. In Washington, the company hardly needed an introduction. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and his brother Alan, director of the CIA, had been partners at a law firm that counted United Fruit among its clients. The interests of a fruit company and the foreign policy of the United States dissolved into each other until no one could say where one ended. In June 1954, the CIA's Operation PB Success went live. A small exile force crossed the border. A clandestine radio station filled Guatemalan airwaves with a phantom invasion that grew larger with every broadcast. Unmarked planes droned over the capital. It was theater, but the army believed it and refused to fight. On June 27, 1954, Jacobo Arbenz, elected by his people, resigned over the radio and walked into exile. The land went back to United Fruit. What followed did not go back. The coup snapped Guatemala's democratic experiment in half, and the country descended through juntas and repression into a civil war that ran 36 years and killed, by Truth Commission accounting, some 200,000 people, most of them Maya villagers. And Sam? Sam was 77, semi-retired, fading, far from the operations room. No serious history claims he ordered any of it. He didn't have to. The machine that did it, the land, the leverage, the Bernays playbook, the friend in Washington, was the machine he had built piece by piece and fueled for 20 years. He'd spent his whole life proving he could outthink consequences. These ones simply waited until he was too old to manage them. History saved one irony for last. Within weeks of the coup, the United States government, having just rescued United Fruit's empire, turned around and sued it. Antitrust. The monopoly Washington found useful abroad was illegal at home, and by 1958 a consent decree was carving the octopus into pieces. The empire Sam seized in one afternoon in Boston was dismantled by lawyers, one filing at a time. Sam wasn't there to fight it. Parkinson's disease was taking him apart the same way. Slowly, procedurally. The hands that hauled ripes off the mobile docks now trembled too badly to sign. He'd already given most of the fortune away. The university buildings, the clinics, the causes nobody heard about because he hated seeing his name on things. He died at home on St. Charles Avenue on November 30th, 1961. 84 years old. The obituaries ran the legend at full length. The peddler who bought a republic. The fish that ate the whale. So, final accounting. In one column. A 14-year-old refugee who arrived with nothing, outworked and outthought the entire American establishment, saved a great company its own aristocrats were killing, and gave the winnings away. In the other, a purchased government in Honduras, a poisoned democracy in Guatemala, and a war whose dead outnumber any fortune. Whole nations whose economies still bend around decisions made for fruit. Same column total. Same man. Back in 1904, a writer named O. Henry, hiding out in Honduras, coined a phrase for the kind of country the banana trade was creating. The phrase outlived him, outlived Sam, outlived the company itself. Banana Republic. Every time you hear it, you're hearing the world Sam Zemurray built. Whether he was a visionary or a villain, honestly, the record says yes. If this story got its hooks in you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because there's a new deep dive every single week, and the next one is already loaded. And tell me in the comments which side of Sam's ledger weighs more for you.